Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whisky podcast. I am joined today, and I'm joined as always by my good friend, my business partner, Mr. Jason Johnston Yellen. Middle name, Neil Patrick Harris.
Hello. How are you?
I am a bit of a broken man after our 9-10 days in Scotland. After my 4 days just doing events, doing Zooms, doing dinners. But it's Friday. I would argue it's Fry-yay. And I'm looking forward to the weekend. I actually have a couple nights off, which I'm excited about.
Fry-yay sounds like a hip-hop album, or at least a hip-hop artist. You heard the latest from Fry-yay? Have I?
Yeah, but he's like from the 90s. Or actually, I take that back. He's from 2003. Fry-yay, MC Fry-yay is from 2003.
I like the fact that we experienced this in our Zoom the other night, but like we keep going back to the 90s as the thing that shows something was a long time ago. and I like your 2003 is 21 years ago. Well, we can say things in the 2000s. They were a long time ago too.
How is 2003 21 years ago?
Time passes.
Oh my gosh, I don't like any of that. None of it makes sense.
I drove through our little town here the other day and they were putting up the Christmas tree. And I just felt like they'd taken it down about 10 minutes ago. It was it's like, oh, wow, you took it down on Monday, you're putting it back up on Friday? Like, what's this about? We've said it for a long time, and I know we're repeating ourselves, but time is moving faster and faster.
Yeah, I mean, we're olds. We're basically olds, Jason.
I like your use of basically.
So listen, our time in Scotland, and we talked about this, if memory serves, we talked about it on the podcast last episode, and we definitely posted it in our Facebook group and in Instagram, where we were tasting through 90 different samples. We had 117, but we tasted through 90 of them, and we'll be revisiting the remainder. But going through those over a few days reminded me that some months back, some weeks back, however long it was, Jason, you had challenged our listeners to come at us with their thoughts, their desires of what distilleries they would like to see us bottle. And we got a number of emails, but there were 4 in particular that I wanted to highlight, and I thought we could front load those before your conversation with the people at VDC, which is sort of the meat of this episode.
Yeah, what a trip that was. Yeah. Happy to talk about that. Gosh.
Yeah. So let's do that. Which email do you want to start with, Jason?
Why don't you give us Aaron Gong, because he shares a state with you.
He does not share a state with me.
He does not share a state with you. He shares a border with you.
He does. He shares a border with me. He's a Massachusetts guy.
You're not in Massachusetts?
No.
Oh, it's the first I've heard of this.
I'm a bit upset with you, Jason. Listen.
I wish listeners could see your face right now. That landed exactly how I'd hoped. I am feeling very happy with myself.
It could be worse. You could have accused me of being from New York. Everybody assumes I'm from New York simply because I'm Jewish. I'm like, no, fucking Connecticut, born and raised. Treat me with respect.
Listen, a joke's a joke. Massachusetts, that's a joke, right? New York, that's an insult. So I would not go there. It was merely a joke. I was merely playing around.
That is the joke.
Hashtag no offense to anybody living in New York, but you should move.
You should move quickly. Aaron emailed us on October 30th, which for people playing at home, that's Mischief Night, a.k.a. the night before Halloween. And he says, I'm a big fan, having recently procured bottles of your Williamson 8 Ben Nevis 11, Balmenic 11, Glen Scotia 12, and Craigellachie 16.
That's great. Yeah, I love that list. Thank you.
Right? That covers bottlings from our online shop and our retail bottlings. Like just
Exactamundo.
An SCN Super Nation member. So thank you, Aaron.
And gets a cheeky wee Balmenic under the wire.
Right. Jason, your new fetish distillery there. He goes on and he says, some other distilleries I'd love to see released under the SCN label, in no particular order, include Benromach, Tobermory, Bladnoch, Tobermory.
Message received.
Arran, Lag, Glentalkers, and Altmore. I don't think we want to let too many cats out of too many bags, but what do we want to say here in response to Aaron's email?
Well, my question to you actually is along the lines of this Benromach, which is, what's your take on the Benromach distillery? The reason I ask is long-time listener and supporter, Anthony Levinson, turned me on to what he thought was an absolute, excellent example of a standard expression.
Yeah.
And it was Benromach. And it didn't land on my palate particularly well. And I was quite surprised because Anthony and I agree on a lot of things palate-wise. Yeah. And it hadn't landed for me. And so, I'm curious for you on that distillery, but also Benromach obviously owned by Gordon MacPhail. We're not seeing a lot of Benromach on the open market.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for Gordon MacPhail what their plan is with that distillery. But what's your take on that distillery first and foremost?
Yeah, Benromach, I discovered them early on in my own whiskey journey. I remember through Jew Malt Whiskey Reviews when I had my blog and reviewing their Benromach 10. And again, this was really early in my journey, and I loved it. I fell in love with it. The peat was unusual. The sherry was unusual. Revisiting it, it didn't hit me the way that... And I revisited it earlier this year because I think of your conversation with Anthony Levinson. And it didn't hit my palate the way I remembered. But, last year, or maybe it was the year before, or the year before that, I don't remember, I got a single cask of Benromach, unpeated, bottled for Gordon's Fine Wines in Massachusetts. And I bought you a bottle. I don't think you've opened it yet.
I have not. No.
But it was excellent. Just excellent. Bourbon cask, unpeated, fruity, rich, citrusy, zingy. Like, it was doing a lot of really interesting and fun things. I think what doesn't hit with my palate on the Benromach is the peat. For whatever reason, the versions with peat that I've had just, didn't settle with me.
Yeah, I think to your point there, it goes to show exactly what we're in the business of doing here. So you've had a standard release that didn't land. So you've had a cask that didn't land. There are thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of other casks that might be the best thing you've ever had. Yeah. So I was just curious if you had a general take there. I like Tobermory appearing twice. Obviously, we've got the Tobermory that we talked about with Jess for the global markets that continues. You and I were drinking that in Scotland. That continues to be a standout.
Oh, man.
Holy macaroni. And then Arran Lag, someone else last week, someone else was asking me about Arran and Lag. And we keep asking, that's what it was. It was the Single Nation Zoom tasting that we did. Yeah. And somebody in there was talking, any more Arran, any more Lag? And so you'll see Lochranza, we continually ask the question about Lag.
Yeah, can I just chime in there really quickly with Aaron as with Aaron looking for Aaron as a Massachusetts guy, Burlington Wine and Spirits. We did an exclusive peated Aaron for them, and they split that with Canterbury Liquors, our friend Irene, here in Connecticut. So if you're looking for some cheeky wee lightly peated Aaron, Burlington Wine and Spirits is going to be your friend there. And then And then there's Glen Talkers in Altmore. Jason, do you want to touch on the Glen Talkers?
Only to say there is one coming that will be under a fanciful name. Look for that in ecom. And then I would leave it at that for this email, because we've got a lot to get through that we're trying to cover in an intro.
Good point. So, okay, who's our next email, Jason?
So I'm using a transition here, Joshua.
Oh, boy.
And so if you look over Aaron's list, they're very Scotch heavy. Mm-hmm. And I love seeing that as a Scotsman. But we have a partial counterpoint coming in here. And so we have, hi, Jason and Joshua. This is Adam from Lost Lantern Whisky.
Okay.
How lovely to see Adam in our inbox. I heard your recent request on the podcast for new distilleries that would be interesting for you all to work with. And I wanted to shoot you some ideas that I would be excited about. This speaks so well to what we do as independent bottlers, right? Mm-hmm. Here's a fellow independent bottler reaching out to say, hey guys, I follow your brand. I'm excited by your brand. Here's some things I'm looking for as a consumer of your brand, but also as a fellow independent bottler.
Yeah,
very cool.
Yep.
Very cool.
Yep, agreed.
I would love it if you would work with even more American single malt distilleries. I've loved many of your independently bottled American single malts from Westland, Westward, Balcones, Copperworks, and others. Wow. And we'd love to see even more. Places like Cedar Ridge in Iowa, McCarthy's in Oregon, Andalusia in Texas, Boulder. So I go with the European pronunciation, but we can agree to disagree.
There you go. Okay.
Boulder Spirits in Colorado, 888 in Massachusetts. Here's a mention for Massachusetts again. Right. And mesquite smoked single malts like Whiskey Daleback in Arizona and Santa Fe Spirits in New Mexico jump to mind. That's a terrific list. These are distilleries that are already near and dear to our hearts, and I bet you'd find some other great ones too. I would love to see the single cask nation perspective on these whiskies. This is such a good IB moment here. What your palates bring to those distilleries and what you would find in them. I think that's the great thing when multiple independent bottlers work with a given distillery. Your Westlands are different from our Westlands, are different from Westland's Westlands. And that's the fun.
Love that.
Just so good.
Right?
So good. Final paragraph and we're out of here. You have wonderful reach. Well, thank you very much. I am 6'2". And if you did even more American single malt, it would help introduce these distilleries to a wider audience around the world. We truly think these are some of the finest and most exciting single malts being made anywhere. And I want them to get as much attention as they possibly can because they deserve it. That's an excellent email. What a wonderful call to arms for fellow American-based independent bottlers to say, here's a category. Look at the subject of today's podcast, right? Like, here we are at VDC talking to them about casks.
Indeed.
Like,
yeah.
we're in the thick of American single malt, and representing it is important to us. And obviously we work day in and day out with Steve Hawley as well, president of the American Single Malt Whisky Commission, which I can now say without even having to think about. I've remembered the name of his organization that freely.
Yeah, I love this email for all of the reasons that you mentioned, but one more, and this is something that we've banged on about for quite some time. When people say, well, don't you compete with Cadenheads? Don't you compete with Lost Lantern? Don't you compete with Gordon MacPhail? And so on. And the answer to that is pretty similar to what Mark Watt had said many years ago, is we're not really in competition with one another. We're all playing the same game, and our consumers tend to be the same people who buy from all of us. We're just a group of whiskey lovers with the same aim, looking to do some interesting things. So the fact that Adam reached out and said, like, I want to see your version of these distilleries. I love seeing their versions of these distilleries because it's just different perspectives, which is just super cool. So
exactly. The other part for me here is there's a list here that we're very familiar with. I will be very honest in saying 888 in Massachusetts.
Yeah, new to me as well.
I'm not familiar with them, so that's well worth looking into. Following up on that as well. That was a real cracking email from Adam, and I love that he's listening. I love that he's following a fellow independent bottler. I wonder, Joshua, if production meeting on the fly, as we're prone to do, should we save the other two of these until later in today's episode?
Yeah, let's do that, because the way this episode is going to go is we've got some time with you and the VDC team in the warehouse tasting some things, and then we've actually broken up the conversation into two parts. So we'll listen to the first part of the conversation, and then we've got some really important news that we want to be sharing with our listeners here. That we just want to highlight, and then we'll go into the second part of the conversation, and then let's close out this episode hearing from the listeners. Sound good?
As far as on-the-fly production meetings go, I think that's been one of the best.
Speaking of one of the best, your conversation, your time with VDC, listening back to these discussions and you tasting through these whiskeys, it's just lovely to hear the honesty as you all approach these whiskeys, and I think the conversation was just a joy to listen to. So,
cheers. It doesn't always happen, but as soon as I left VDC, I texted you and said, I think what I got on wax is some of the best material we've ever got on wax. And it was for that reason, like I felt very much in the moment, and I felt like Amanda and Dustin, Brian, John, the team, I felt like they were genuinely sharing information.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we're trying to do with the podcast is give that fly on the wall experience to the listener.
Yeah.
We're also trying to be more present, and I don't mean that in terms of listening to the people we're speaking to, but being physically present with people.
Yeah.
And so the Ardnamurchan, where there we are on site and in the warehouses. Here I am down in Livingston. We're going to do more of this, where we get back to being more physically present with the people we're interviewing. But I want to say a very quick part about Barrel Bootcamp here.
Okay.
So this is their title for what they get up to in the spring and in the fall, and it's a chance for them to get into their casks and work out what they have got on hand. I hope it made it into the final version of our edit here, but just in case it didn't, one of the things for me is I'm always in my single cask nation headspace. I'm always thinking in terms of single casks. And to be at a bricks and mortar distillery and in a cask house, as they like to call it, Amanda at one point turned around and said, all of these casks are individual ingredients.
I remember that.
And it's such a telling moment for a significant difference between being a bricks and mortar distillery and being an independent bottler of single casks. And I kept trying to get back out of that headspace, and I kept finding myself back in my single cask nation headspace, but it's well worth keeping in mind. And here we are in the warehouse, popping bungs. We're experiencing casks together on wax for the first time, so that listeners get to hear the in-the-moment reaction of the VDC team here. And so, I'll leave that as my intro for this first segment.
Okay.
Then when we come back to the news, I'll give another little brief intro for the second segment. So enjoy my time with the team at VDC. Phenomenal group of people. I'm standing in the VDC warehouse with Amanda, Brian, and Dustin of VDC. Thanks a million for bringing me into the Barrel Bootcamp this morning.
First question for you is, Amanda, when we've talked previously, we've talked about seasonality here and what the casks will hold and flavor profiles from casks. Barrel Bootcamp is your chance to check in on casks. You do this once a year, you do this twice a year. What does it look like and what are you looking for?
Yes, we've done Barrel Bootcamp for several years now, and we frame it in the spring and in the fall. So twice a year, and then occasionally we'll sneak in a couple extra days to fit more in as we need to.
And do you find there's a difference from environmental conditions in the spring to environmental conditions in the fall, or are they one and the same kind of sweet spot within the calendar?
I'd say there are definitely differences. I mean, with barrels expanding versus contracting more, it's that sort of as the weather's warming up, everything is kind of coming out of dormancy. So that would be spring. And in the fall, it's much more, things have been very volatile. And now we have big swings still happening. I mean, this morning was 36 degrees, and now it's creeping up. We'll hit the 50s today. But there is still a trend happening, and things are starting to shrink back in. Things are tightening back up. So there is a level of consistency. Things are showing at their peak for a lot of reasons, but things are also very different from spring to fall.
So we're standing here in the warehouse, the Cask house, as we call it at VDC. One of the things Josh and I always talk about is we go into warehouses, they're a lot of fun to be in, they're a lot of fun to pull samples from, but we never select a cask from a warehouse experience. Given that we're standing in this warehouse today and we're going to start pulling samples, why are we doing that? What is your goal today?
I often call this speed dating. It's just getting to know where things are showing in the casks. So we're always very mindful of making sure the whiskey's not getting over oaked, for example. So we're kind of checking on the readiness. Most of these barrels, we're not checking for the first time. You'll notice they have drill holes, sometimes many drill holes, or, the bungs have been removed many times. But we're kind of tracking the progress of things, and 100% agree with you. We would never pick a single barrel from just what we're trying up here in the cask house. Samples will go down the hill. That's where reductions and analysis actually takes place. But this is the cursory overview, getting to see how things are coming along and kind of where we think things will be going and closing in on the window of when things need to be pulled.
So I have to say I am incredibly honored to be participating in this with all of you today. This is rarefied air, and so thank you so much. I believe later we're going to move into the lab. Is that part of our plan?
Yes. So Barrel Bootcamp is fun in the cask house, but we definitely have to be focusing in on the actual blending side of things too, how things are coming along, and some single barrel picks even too, how they're showing. We do a lot of fun sensory up here, but the real analysis is always in a closed environment that's much more structured.
Okay, so maybe we'll figure out a way to get a little bit of that on wax later on today.
I think so.
For the moment, we're not going to record every cask that we're pulling today, but you've got a list in front of you. Can you give us a sample of what we will be looking at today? And then maybe we can pull our first one, if I may be so bold.
Absolutely. So as I'm talking today, my colleague Brian, our sales and warehouse manager, has been pulling samples for us from experimentals. So today is experimental day. These are casks that we've been kind of checking in on for the past few years. Nothing is younger than a 2-year finish time today.
Okay.
Some of these are almost 9-year-old
Okay.
whiskeys. So we have an array, but it's fun to see how our whiskey does as distillate going into different cask types. And this is a check-in on some of the crazier things.
For Brian, just as your name got mentioned a second ago there, you're the man pulling the samples for us. Thank you so much.
You are most welcome.
For the listeners tuning in from all points around the compass, can you talk about what it's like pulling a sample? What's your process for pulling a sample here?
Well, for the most part, depending on how we are aging these barrels, a lot of them, as you can see here, are stacked high. If that is the case, we are drilling into the side of them and just pulling directly from there. Otherwise, some of the more experimental barrels we do have just on racks, your common wine
Yeah,
racks.
saw that coming in the door.
So a lot of times there, if it's going to be a short finish, it's just going to be a silicone bung. We can just pull a sample out very quickly. Otherwise, we're just drilling straight in and pulling our samples that way.
Brilliant. And when you say drilling straight in, you're literally using a hand drill and you've got little wood cones for plugging the dike, so to speak.
Spiles is what we call them. Yeah, we
Spiles?
Spiles.
Oh,
yes.
I did not know that name. Spiles.
So basically, we just drill in and then drill a top hole if needed, and then pull our sample, bang it back in, and wait for the next time.
That's rocking. Absolutely rocking. Okay, so Amanda, we've had Brian pull the first sample here. What do we have in our glass?
So this right here is a Marsala cask. We took our already aged whiskey. It aged for half a decade in ex-bourbon barrels. And then back in the spring of 2022, we moved the aged whiskey into the Marsala cask. So fortified wine casks from Italy.
When you say ex-bourbon a second ago, are you looking at first fill, second fill,
First fill.
refill? First fill.
Yes.
So we've had this in Single Cask Nation where we've accidentally gone from first fill bourbon to a first fill finish, but that's the remit here. That's how you do business here.
Yes. Well, the
Wow.
idea is that these have already had their first life as new oak holding bourbon barrels. So it is their second life already. A lot of the harsher tannins have been stripped away, but we're looking for a rounding out of our new make to take on the vanillins, the lactones, the more spice that we would expect, would be subtle. Like it's a slow growing phase. So after 5 years, we have some cinnamon, we have some cardamom or clove creeping in, but you still get that bright tropical note. So our goal is to make sure that the DNA of what we're making here still gets to shine through, no matter the maturation, no matter the finish. And that's why we're experimenting with just a handful of some of these like Marsala, because we don't know what that's going to do over 1 to 2 to 3 years.
Okay. And just to reiterate, you were saying you're about 6 years in the bourbon, and currently for the sample we're about 2 or 3 years. Am I remembering that?
Yes. So it was over 5 years when we pulled it from the ex-bourbon barrels.
Okay.
And then going into the Marsala. So yeah, 2.5 years now finishing.
This is awesome. Listeners cannot see this, but Amanda is reading straight from her sheet to give us the up-to-date information on this VDC cask. Oh my gosh. Okay, so here comes some Marsala finish.
I still don't know what to make it.
This is a lot.
It's
Complex for sure.
divisive, interesting.
This is Dustin talking, by the way.
Yeah. So I'm the distillery director here. This is a whiskey that is juxtaposes both beautiful and interesting terms, for lack of a better term. It is savory. It is decadent. It is sweet. It makes you think it's going to go one way, then it goes the other. I'm still processing.
Have you, all three of you, dipped in and out of this cask before? Have you been watching this, or is this a new addition?
Yes, I think we have all at least once dipped into this, although the last time was 6 months ago.
Oh, okay.
And it has definitely changed, and the Marsala cask is its own entity. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So Brian and I have had, I think, 3 times with this. Dustin, you've definitely had it, but I think it was maybe a year ago.
About a year ago.
Yeah. And again, we've talked before about aging is not linear.
Yes, very much so.
So this is one that I feel like, because of where this cask was placed, because of, temperatures are dropping pretty radically now, I bet this would taste very different even a month from now.
Agreed. And when we tasted in the heat of summer, it was more on the, as Dustin said, interesting side. And I enjoy this. I actually had Marsala for dinner last night. So,
Oh, okay.
I'm feeling this right now.
For dinner or with
Yes.
dinner?
And it's one of those, it is kind of, I think, a love or hate
Yeah.
kind of, whiskey, but it's definitely something that's coming along and something we're going to keep our eye on for, the next couple of years.
It has this funky monkey quality to it where the savory is interesting and beguiling and leading us somewhere. And then there's a sweetness to it, almost we've talked a lot, in the past about Honey Nut Cheerios making its way into VDC maturation. This has a sweetness that's like that and yet funky, like funky Honey Nut Cheerios, if that term could make sense.
Absolutely. I think one of the really important things to understand about any maturation is that humidity plays a significant factor in the way that we taste our whiskey. Humidity deals with the way that the staves, I mean, staves are living cells, right? Like the wood's no longer living, but the cells still behave the same. So they swell with water, they contract, they have this type of oscillation. So when you have high humidity, these cells want to swell with water. When you have low humidity, they don't want to swell with water. And in fact, they'll swell with alcohol instead of water. So depending on like the percentage of humidity, depends on whether your staves are tracking in outside water into the staves and forcing the alcohol back into solution, or they're drawing the alcohol from the cask up into the stave and taking some of those bigger chain compounds up into the stave. It really makes a difference in what you're tasting and depending on the seasonality. Here,
I like you were so confident, and then you got to this moment you were like, and now for this whiskey.
And now for this whiskey. This whiskey befuddles me. I'll just go to the word befuddle because
in 8 seasons you might be the first person to use befuddled on the podcast.
Well, brilliant. There is this entire love-hate relationship going on with it. Of this, it intrigues. There's so many compounds that are coming into the whiskey, but there's a savoriness, an umami note that comes out that seems unexpected. That I don't know if I like, but the longer I sit on it, the more I like it.
I agree with that. For me, I think, like Brian said, I'm thinking food all the time. And the notes themselves, like the orange peel, the sage, the cardamom, like they're really intriguing. I want to pair it with food. I just think my concern with this whiskey is what's the audience for it, finding the right home for it. And that's something that, this is also the not right time to pull, as we're already seeing. But I think it's a maybe take a sample in the spring and bring it down and actually do some analysis of it.
So Brian was saying previously that the Marsala maybe wasn't as prominent in this before. What was different then? Like, put some leaves on those branches for me.
I think Dustin will agree. There was still a savory bit to it, but it went almost bitter on the finish.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it was, to me now, this is more round. This is more cohesive. Before, it was very disjointed. And you've got these notes that you're finding in here now, but they were sort of all over the place. Whereas now, I don't think they're there still, but it is coming together, and there's a amalgamation that's happening that is much more pleasing to me.
Do you, given your prior experience of the cask, do you have the same love-hate relationship that Dustin's describing here?
I am more on the love side right now.
Okay.
I agree that it is not ready, but there is something that is so unique about it that pushes me towards the love more than the dislove.
I think that's well said, and it makes me feel, we're protective of the whiskey, and we have to find the right home and also the right time. So yeah, I think it still is a little bit angular and discordant, but I think we can get it there over the next few years.
And that's the interesting part for me. So first of all, I appreciate your willingness, all three of you, to be on the record very honestly describing this cask. I think the consumer gets so trained. Josh and I were just talking about this the other day. The consumer gets so trained on every cask is a belter. This is better than the one before. Welcome to the party. Thank you for your money. And for you to be a legit bricks and mortar distillery with an on-site warehouse where you're tracking casks. Can you remind us how many casks you have on site, ballpark?
Yeah, well, the cask houses each can hold 6,000 casks in capacity, so we're hovering at 10,000-ish
There
right
you
now,
go.
just a little
less,
under.
but yeah.
Right, 10,000 or so, give or take. We're all friends together. You're charting those. That's what we're doing today. We're checking in on some of the latest efforts here. I'm guessing you have to be pretty honest about your 10,000 or so children who live up in the cask house.
It doesn't do anybody any service to pretend like everything's great. Our job is to make it great and to learn from mistakes.
I think specifically back to this cask.
Yep.
What Amanda said about finding the right audience is very, very important here. This cask is one of these flavors that it can't be divisive. Like there are going to be flavors all over across the map that are going to be divisive. Like I sit and I study this. When I say it was a love-hate relationship, I find myself taking a sip, sitting on it like I don't like it. No, I need to have another sip of that. And I keep going back to the same glass, like constantly. It's intriguing that the complexity to it is there. And to the right discerning audience, this might be ready. But for us and for like what we want to present, like we have to be ready for not only the story, but the idea of how we're going to present this cask. And this one right now it's got potential. It's got legs. It's just a matter of finding the right window for us to be able to present those, to present that story in the way that we want to show it.
For the three of you, you're saying it's got legs. Is it a maturation journey for this? Is it a positioning journey for this? Right. I've got my single Cask Nation hat on. It's the only hat I own. I think of everything in terms of single casks, and it makes me think of Aberclady Palo Cordado that was love it and hate it in the same glass as you're describing, Dustin. I would taste it and I would absolutely hate it, but I would hate it so much I would start to like it. And then as I liked it, I really loved it, but I loved it so much I started to dislike it. And then I disliked it so much I really hated it. It was a hell of a journey. We also had our first Westland where Joshua and I knew some people, and this is more to your presentation, Dustin, some people would love it. And some people would hate it, not within the one glass journey, but more of a bifurcated, there are lovers and haters, a bit like Lafroig's marketing campaign. As you look at this now, you're not just in the business of single casks. You do have single cask releases, but you're also blending. You're bringing your casks together. What's the journey as you taste this today in October of 2024?
Well, we have a very concrete framework we operate within. So it's a grading positioning. So every barrel gets graded on readiness, maturation, as well as distinctness, the characteristics that it portrays. So for this barrel, it is rated a A2-.
Amanda returns to her notes that she's been writing while
Everything
we've been
is mid.
talking. Okay, continue.
Records are crucial, and that's how you can see things progress. But yeah, C's are foundational. It doesn't mean C's are worse or better than a B or an A. C's are great. They're the bedrock of what we build on. It just means it's the expected baseline.
The rhythm of an orchestra.
Yes.
The rhythm of an orchestra.
So if we're treating this like we're composers, we're conductors even, we're looking for something that's very foundational for the rhythm section, and that could be a lot of ex-bourbon barrels, for example. Something more distinctive or unique would be something like this. It brings an interesting complexity. Or befuddling. So I see that a lot of people would operate it and treat this as a single barrel, but that's not where my brain goes at all. It thinks how it would be complemented, how it would be accented well where it would belong in a blend, and what it would bring to the table for something that might otherwise be kind of flat.
Speak to that from a VDC perspective. It's a funky monkey for me, Mr. Single Cask. What are you seeing as the qualities that go forward on this?
I love the citrus and I love the savory. I think that the orange peel is beautiful. I love that arc that it brings in. I like the sage. I think that could be like, this is almost a Thanksgiving whiskey for me. I would love to pair it with like a really good rustic stuffing, or Dustin's looking hungry. What do you want to say?
I actually want to give a little bit of a slight pushback. And I think this is really gives us the feedback that we do here. Like, I think of this as a single cask. I do think of these notes as singular and odd and intriguing. And I don't care about the divisiveness. I mean, there are certain casks that should be divisive. Like, not everybody's going to enjoy every flavor. And so, like, the fact that something makes you stop, pause, and now, analyze what you're tasting. Like, I think that there's some solid value to that. Not to take away from where it can play into a blend, but I do think that in the right market, as we start to see this cask fully maturate, we could find a good home for people who would really be into this type of profile.
I could agree with that. I mean, the other part of the question Jason asked was maturation readiness, and it is not a level 1. So 3 is youthful, 2 is maturing, showing some development, and 1 is ready. So this is not there yet. So sure, in time we could come back to it and see, but I agree with you. It would have to be the right audience.
Yeah. You gave it 2-, and the only pushback that I'm going to give you on we give a minus, neutral, and a plus for the actual quality once we hit the readiness factor on those. And I don't think it needs a minus.
Mr. Love-Hate, and I really like it. So
I love what you're both doing live. This is wonderful. Thank you so much.
The minus is there because of the discordance. I'm looking for something that's more cohesive, and I think give it time, I might take away that minus.
Okay,
but not today.
Really, I don't know if the minus is one of those traits that is maturable. Like it's something kind of baked into the pie, and it's one of those things where like that flavor that I'm finding discordant, I think it's actually one of the flavors that you're enjoying.
Yes, I think the savory depth and all of that is there, but my personal enjoyment has no ranking at all, and that's why it's not.
All right, I'm gonna yield. I'll yield the floor to you. On this
I can never judge something because I like it. It has to be very concrete. Thus the CBA and the 321.
Now that's so interesting because this week Joshua and I have been selecting casks for 2025, and one of the things Joshua has been saying in some of our recordings over there is we only select for ourselves, and if we love it, if we place value upon it, that's what we then take to the nation. And we say, we love this so much, we want to share this with you. And so I don't want to misrepresent you right now, but could you speak to a little bit of that point of difference between Single Cask Nation and Virginia Distillery Company?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm wearing my scientist hat right now. I'm not the artist. I'm not doing this blend to make it something that I love and I want to take a bottle home with me. My job is to grade these barrels and get to know the ingredients. These are only raw ingredients right now to me. That's all this is. I'll take it down in sample form. I'll do my reductions, get my readings on it, all of that. I'm still being a scientist. I'm just parsing out my ingredients. That's all this is.
The funny thing is, like, we find ourselves on opposite sides of this coin at different times. And, like, now I'm going to find myself on the opposite side. I consider myself the scientist when it comes down to the distillation end. Like, I'm very numeric. I can tell you every single pH. As soon as something's off kilter, like, I can tell you where in the process we're having issues. But in maturation, where things become more intriguing, the volatile nature of maturation gets to play a factor into this. I find myself to be a little bit more on for lack of a better word, the artistic side. And so something like this, like
Amanda makes a face.
it's great. No. Honestly, the three of us have now worked together. We have determined, like, we're coming up on like 7 or 8 years. Like we are all deeply ingrained in each other's heads. Like we do shorthand on all of our sensory notes. Most of the time our palates are so aligned, it's ridiculous. When we find points of contention, that's where we actually have a lot of fun, because now we can actually start to understand, like, why does that point of contention exist? What are the things that we are liking or hating? What are the things that we are wanting to progress on? So this is a great whiskey for us to actually have, like, on live right now, because it is so divisive. I can't think of anything that we've had recently that has caused this type of sniping, like
Discussion, please.
discussion. Like I have no doubt that we'll be able to reach some type of concordant discussion about this, but at the same time, like I kind of love to hate this whiskey. And like, if this came out as a single cask, I wouldn't shed a tear.
I love the conversation you're all willing to have on wax. We've never done anything like this on the podcast, and this is brilliant, literally brilliant. Brian,
You've come on a great day, because I have to say that we, as Dustin said, we are always 90% of the time on the same page. And you came on experimental day, and the experimentals are going to be
divisive. Gotcha.
It's good for us to actually get this, because sometimes we are so on the same page that we have to, like, check ourselves.
Yeah.
And, bring in
echo chamber kind of stuff.
Bring in John Prine, our other John Price into back from the dead into the mix has really helped to kind of too soon. Has really kind of helped to get us sort of realigned.
Yeah.
Because there's sometimes when we come up here and we do sensory, and it's a good thing, because that shows consistency in the whiskey, which is great.
Sure.
But we are always on the same page. So when we come to days like this where we're doing strange stuff and experimentals, it's great to sort of separate a little bit and, like, find our palates again.
And I appreciate the fact that, according to Amanda's list, there's a lot of casks to get through, and I've taken up about half an hour of your time on the first sample. Brian has prepared another sample for us here. Amanda, first of all, for the listener, where, you all have done this before. Dustin was just saying that you've done this for 7-8 years. Where do you now stand on that first sample? What's in the notes for how does that move forward? What are you all in agreement on?
I think we all agree it's a waiting game.
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
No matter how much praise I give to it, or lack of
hate.
praise, it needs more time, like, for us to make a firm decision.
Okay.
100%. So again, I think it's discordant largely because it's a volatile time right now, and I still think it is a little youthful. So I have notes. We're going to come back to it next year, revisit it, and if we're feeling ready, we'll take samples down and really give it some attention.
Is next year spring? Is next year fall? Is next year to be determined?
This year, we'll probably look at pulling a sample in the spring, but I think the real focus will probably be a full year from now.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. Okay, moving on. See why we're not going to record every single cask sample. Okay, one more. Let's have another good discussion on this. Amanda, please, with the details.
So this one is an Amontillado sherry cask. It's been in there for 4 years and 7 months.
Okay.
So yeah, kind of fun to take a look at this one.
Is this finish? Is this full maturation?
Yes, it is a probably 4 to 6 year.
My note has 5 year in there.
Okay.
So 5 year aged next bourbon, and then it's been finishing. So this is the second maturation. We're coming on some 9-year-old.
Holy moly!
Yeah.
Wow. Well, gosh, I feel honored. Thank you so much. And this is still experimental, so who knows what may follow from this. That was a contented sigh from Dustin.
I think we're going to all agree on this experiment.
It's lovely.
There's no argument here. There's certain things that like you taste and you instantly know that we're going to all fall in line. This is one of them.
And that was actually my question for you, Brian. When you're pulling a sample, and I've had the honor of doing this myself, where you drill the hole, the stream begins, you're filling a glass or you're filling a bottle, there's an aroma in the air. You've done this for 8 years now, 9 years now?
Coming up on 8 years.
Okay. Have you got to a point where even in that very early stream, you've got a sense of where this is going?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And this is one I can remember in particular. It was actually while we were doing our audit last year. We have an auditor come in every year just to, cover our tracks.
Oh, okay.
And we have to pull samples from barrels so he is assured that we're not filling these with water XO.
Oh, my Lord.
So
I've been wasting my time for a lot of years if you're filling these with water.
So I actually chose this one because we hadn't tasted it yet. And it was that moment of drilling, and as soon as it hit the glass, and I had to climb for this one. So it's a moment of, and for us three, I know they would align with me as well. It's a beautiful cask, and it's still needs a little time, but it is well on its way.
Okay, so what are you getting in the air when the stream is coming? Is it a sweetness? Is it a nuttiness? Is it
for this
the VDC spirit itself?
It's the spirit itself. It's the air in here. As soon as you walk in here, you have to come in here every day for 8 years. But there is an aroma to this air that is unlike anything else.
Okay.
But as soon as it hits the glass, it was sort of that honey nut Cheerio, very nutty, a lot of honey, apricot, fig, just a beautiful thing.
In previous visits, I've heard you all talk about apricot as a VDC spirit characteristic.
Yes. So we talk a lot about the core flavor compounds that are created back during fermentation. So a lot of the esters contribute orchard fruit notes. So apricot could really be coming from that peach nectarine note we originally get, along with some of the green apple. I think a little bit more time in cask usually brings out more of that apricot note. And for me, in addition to everything Brian said, which was spot on, I get a lot of floral, like gardenia, jasmine. There's a delicate, almost honeysuckle tea-like component that I really love.
Jasmine is one of those notes that it seems almost like overly pretentious to mention a lot of times. But when jasmine really presents itself in a lot of our casks, and it does in our Fino sherries, it does obviously in this cask, it's so strong. Like I feel very confident in saying that, like, that floral note just is prevalent, and then to have it on top of all those honey notes, it's beautiful. It's complex. It has a lot of those nutty notes. We a lot of times will go ahead and individualize the difference between different nut notes, whether it's almond, peanut, or whatever the case is. But a lot of times that kind of is, hedging between certain things. Right here, like, I would definitely call it more on the peanut versus the almond or the hazelnut, but
it's still for all, for sure.
For all. That's exactly it. Like, when you actually get into the individual compounds of what is causing this, it's just a matter of the propensity of it, the volumes of it. And so, like, here, it's a beautiful bouquet. And I mean, it's hard to argue against.
So I think the question for the audience is, so many of us cherish first fill bourbon maturation. Why would you take your VDC and first fill bourbon and move it over to Amontillado? What are you looking for in doing that?
I think this cask is a great example of what we're looking for. I'm always thinking, how do we enhance or contrast flavor compounds? So a lot of the notes we were talking about that started back in fermentation are going to be reflected in a really beautiful way or brought out. So it's a bunch of contrasts for me. I think it's like when you're an artist, you're working on shading, and I'm looking at Brian because he's my artist. He's always during meetings making sketches. But yeah, it's about how you can enhance and build up and not mask. So it's creating a framework already and then finding ways to really ice the cake.
I think there's also with our 4, 5, 6 year FB1s, this really nice vanilla creamy note.
Yep, for
that
sure.
When you add into something like sherry that can be a little more on the funky side, it's just such a nice contrast, but also a compliment at the same time.
So I would like to point out the fact that for primary maturation, not only do we do ex-fill bourbons, but we also do full maturation in sherries as well. So a full maturation in sherry is going to yield compounds totally differential than like what you're going to taste in a second fill bourbon. So the idea of taking the ideal, the base, the standard of a first filled bourbon, and being able to finish that, you are looking to add to the palate. I mean, not to sound overly artistic, again, from the person who prides themselves on being the scientist, there is an art to it. There is an idea that you are adding to that structure. There are so many neat vanillinins and wood sugars that come out of a first fill bourbon, but they can only be enhanced. Like all these compounds that you get from whether it's an ex wine cask of fortified wine or red wine, or it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There are so many different compounds that are locked into the wood, into the stave, deep into the stave. To be able to unlock those subtly and slowly, you really get an interesting and unique product that way.
And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for complexity. We don't want a one-dimensional whiskey.
Yeah, I again, my single cask brain is trying to get into, this is phenomenal as a single cask. I would bottle that as a single cask.
I would buy this as a single cask.
So as we're tasting experimental, this is research right now. What are you thinking for the future? You gave the score for the other cask.
Yeah, I've got a B3+, B2 coming on. He's going to argue with me. I think it's still young.
B3?
B is great. B is wonderful.
I agree with
it's
the B.
complex.
I agree with the B, but
the 3 and the
B3
plus. It's still
the plus
showing
is
a lot of
agreed.
new make notes, and I want to bring out more of the oak component. You're going to agree with me now.
Interesting.
Look at him agree. Look at him. He concedes. I have 2 witnesses. He has nothing to say. I know you love it, but remember, science hat on. This is
science hat on for maturation, for the availability of the lactones that are in it.
Yep, it needs another year at least. And I'm thinking something like a special limited release.
Agreed. For what we're looking for and for how this maturates on that the limited linear pathway that we're looking on. A lot of this is, as Amanda pointed out, is not linear. Yep. But there's a certain amount that is. A matter of how much lactones creep into the whiskey, where your furfural levels are. Like certain things are just no-knowns.
He concedes.
I concede.
Yes.
Wow.
This is twice in one session that I'm conceding to Amanda.
Because deep down you are a scientist. You're having a romantic moment with the casks up here in this environment, but you know.
That's the very point, right? The romance of the warehouse will lead you in directions that you maybe don't feel comfortable having gone in multiple months, years from now. This is tremendous. You already know how much I love all of you and how much I love VDC. This conversation is one of the best I've had in my life. Thank you so much. We may very well reappear down in the lab later, but we've got other casks to be drilling and more samples to be tasting. Thank you so much, and we'll talk in another little bit.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Like, it's been fun.
See you soon.
Cheers.
I think as the listener heard during that segment, Dustin and Amanda had it in them to go back and forth a lot longer on that first cask. But you're right. You and I are always trying to, in some ways, show fly on the wall for how we do our selections. There you've got a couple of VDC folk who are like, well, I think it could be used here. Well, I think it could be used there. I think it would have this role going forward. Well, I think it could have this role going forward. You've got to be very honest with your colleagues, and you can't be afraid to speak honestly in the moment. You also can't be hurt when somebody disagrees with you. And you and I did an interview the other week where one of the questions was the Embellish Pod.
Yeah, Embellish Pod. John at Embellish Pod.
Yeah, lovely guy and lovely interview. And he was asking that question, as people often ask us on the road, what do you do when you disagree? Well, technically, we don't disagree a whole hell of a lot. Mm-hmm. But when we do, one person has veto power over the other, and that's the end of the conversation. Mm-hmm. There are very few moments when there is a conversation about, I really believe in this one. I'm really going to go to bat for this one. There's a lot of, I'm just not seeing it. I get it that you're digging this. I'm not getting it.
Yep.
We agree to disagree. It doesn't get bottled and we move on. So to hear Amanda and Dustin have that back and forth, lovely opportunity to hear another group, a bricks and mortar distillery, go back and forth on future uses.
Yeah, agreed. So I want to get into the meat of the news here because there's a lot to go over. First and foremost, last week on November 21st, 2024, for those people listening in 2027,
Thank you. Hello. How's the future? Don't answer that question.
Yeah, there you go. Moving on. We launched 3 new whiskeys, and they were a 10-year-old peated Bunnahabhain under the Stoisha name, because that's one of their peated spirits from Refill Bourbon. A 21-year-old Glengarry, distilled in 2003, speaking of time moving quickly, from First Fill Bourbon. And then finally a 33-year-old Girvan, single grain, distilled in 1990. Talk about time moving fast. And so we launched those on November 21. This episode is dropping the day before Thanksgiving, and I want you all to keep an eye out on our website, on your email, on the Facebook page for details on a Black Friday sale on a number of different whiskeys. You will want to keep your eyes peeled. Don't hurt yourself. Like that whole term, peeling eyes, is kind of disgusting to me. But, here we go. There's going to be some really cool deals going on, and most people know this. We don't do deals a lot, but we said, heck, we're going to do that. So Black Friday, keep your eye on singlecastnation.com. There's going to be some very cool things happening. The other thing that I wanted to mention as well, and this is big for us, the past 5 or 6 years, however time works, Jason, you and I had been doing a Giving Tuesday charitable drive.
Yeah, gosh, over $1 million raised for a whole host of charities.
Over $1 million raised, and the achievement has been great. And we really can't pat ourselves on the back too much, because it really has to do with our listeners, it really has to do with our nation members, helping to support that. As a lot of people know who are listening to this, we were acquired on January 4, and our work life has changed a little bit. It's increased. We were saying just the other day, Jason, you've been traveling so much, you've barely seen a full week at home since August, and I would argue the same rings true for me. You know, trying to grow this business in 2024 has had us away from our homes and away from our offices more than it has had us in our homes and in our offices. And we have incredibly lofty goals that we've been working our butts off to achieve. So for 2024, we've made the conscious decision to just put Giving Tuesday on hold for now so we can focus on the goals that we have in front of us. We're still going to donate to the charities that are near and dear to us. We urge you to do the same, and then we urge you to cast your eye to 2025, and we'll see what we can do about maybe bringing this about once again. No guarantees on what that may look like, but we're gonna look at that in the future for now.
In echoing what you're saying there, keep giving. The nation has shown the generosity. Whether whiskey bottles are on the table or not, go forth, keep giving. Let's continue to represent the best of this whiskey nation of which we're all a part.
There you go. Yep, perfectly said, Jason. Those are the bits of news that I know we needed to put in front of our listeners. Was there any other news that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I would say keep your eyes peeled. There's that term again.
Ouch.
In Germany, the single cask nation offerings at retail for global markets just landed this week, the week of November 18. So look for those making their way to store shelves. The UK continues to have these global offerings. Some are beginning to sell out, as you would expect, but those are still floating around. Israel is working on getting them over. Australia is still waiting to hear final details on what has made it into market. But there's another country where I know we've got a terrific following and terrific support. We're listening. Single Cask Nation is on its way down there as well. So, yeah, as we've always said, empowering the consumer, ask your retailers, hey, do we have Single Cask Nation? Do we have access to Single Cask Nation? I'm hearing great things about it globally. Can we make this happen? So Jess is doing yeoman's work. Markets are looking very good, very strong. We'll have even more global news to talk about in 2025. But for the moment, the big one is the orders arriving in Germany. So please fill your boots. Germans are good supporters of Single Cask Nation. We see you and we appreciate you.
Indeed. And speaking of good supporters, earlier this year with I shouldn't say earlier this year, just these past few months, with our last release, unfortunately, our distributor that covers New York, New Jersey, Connecticut missed out on those bottlings. So all the Single Cask Nation members...
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear it too, but I'm coming around to a bit of good news. While those markets missed our last retail release, our distributor is getting in 4 casks that will, I don't know if they'll be exclusive to these markets, but they're definitely going to find their way into these markets in December of this year, of 2024. And this should be for New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Kentucky. And we're looking at
one of those. It's not like the others.
Right? We're looking at a sherried peated Bunnahabhain, a Stoisha, coming to that market.
For retail, nice.
For retail. We're looking at an Inchmurrin, so Loch Lomond Distillery, Inchmurrin coming in. We're looking at an Othrusk coming into this market.
Hey, paging Elijah Hammond.
and that's a 2010 distillation on that one. And then finally, our Pluscarden Abbey 2007, which was another fanciful name for a distillery that starts with a Mac. Does it start with a Mac or a Milton?
It does not start with a Mac.
Ah, there you go. But just sometimes I think of Duff beer from The Simpsons, right? And that.
Yeah. Was there a character called Milton in The Simpsons who drank that Duff beer?
Sure. No, there wasn't. Wasn't there a Milton?
Well, I'm only asking questions, Joshua.
Oh, just asking questions. So
Just asking questions over here.
I think the answer to these questions is, I'm not going to answer it, but those 4 bottlings, New York, New Jersey,
Awesome.
Connecticut, Kentucky.
Pluscarden Abbey.
Yeah, so look for these in those states. They're not, as of yet, going into any other states. So if you don't live in those states, things like winesearcher.com or some other sites will be your friend if you're keen to find those.
Separate question for you, Joshua. This is just simply whiskey trivia.
Okay.
Do you know which distillery in Scotland was built on the ruins of Pluscarden Abbey?
Do I know what distillery was built on the ruins of Pluscarden Abbey? I mean, my first guess is Milton Duff. That sounds about right, doesn't it?
As far as whiskey trivia goes, you are spot on that Milton Duff Distillery was built on the ruins of Pluscarden Abbey.
Wow, what an interesting name for that bottling.
Right?
Just thinking about this
Oh,
trivia.
I don't even know what bottling you're talking about. I'm just here talking whiskey trivia.
And that one's a sherry cask as well, if memory serves on that one. Just big, robust.
I love it when you trust your memory. I love it when you do that, as memory serves.
Listen, I go into this with the confidence of a middle-aged white man. I remember it this way, and this is how it was.
Wowzers. Anyway, Pluscarden Abbey. What a beautiful name.
So, all right. So I think we've got all of our whiskey news out there. I love that you brought in all of Jess's markets and the work that she's been doing and the partnership that we have in these various markets. We have these American bottlings coming out. We have Black Friday to look forward to. So lots of news there. Talk to us about the second half of your conversation with our friends at VDC.
So after popping bungs in the warehouse,
is that code for something?
No.
Okay.
It is not. It is essential that one take a break for lunch, and so we took a break for lunch, and then after lunch, Amanda had a little test for us, a little blind test. Again, pulling from VDC stocks. But she gave us no information. We sat very quietly. We did not record the very quiet portion of this. And we scored whiskey. We wrote notes. We had takes. We had opinions. And then after the silent period, after the writing period, we then reported back on what we had been experiencing during the blind tasting. So we actually did a series of blind tastings. And this was the first of 3. And I got this one on wax.
Okay.
We then closed the loop on it and then had another 2 blind tasting sessions separately.
Okay. Yeah.
So just like we'd been in the warehouse, we popped more bungs than we got on wax because you can't get all of that on wax. Yeah. Even for our lengthier episodes, we're still cognizant of people's time. So this was excellent. And again, Amanda is very honest in what's happening in here. She was happy for what got put on wax to be shared with the One Nation Under Whisky listenership. So again, this is genuine fly on the wall stuff in the tasting room at Virginia Distillery Company.
war room, aka whiskey room, aka boardroom, aka upstairs of the stills. And we're sitting here. Amanda has poured 4 blind samples. All I know is it's distilled spirit. There could be any kind of sneaky surprise up your sleeve. And we've been set the task of noting appearance, nose, palate, conclusions, and then a score. Where, am I right in saying the score is really just a ranking at this point?
At this point, yes.
We're not really scoring it out of 5 or out of 10 or out of
Correct.
100. So it's just a ranking at this point. So talk to us a bit about what is this stage of Barrel Bootcamp. We had the experimental cask samples up in the warehouse, and now this feels a bit more scientific. We're sitting down, controlled conditions. What's your goal here, Amanda?
This is all about honing in sensory analysis and making decisions. So at this point, I love doing blind samples. I think it's really great to get unbiased opinions and really start honing in on different techniques that we can use to make our products better or more innovative. And so this one is something that I often do. I have snuck in brandies. I've snuck in rums. In this case, it is whiskey. We're very focused today on our own distillate. And yeah, I'm looking to see what the crew thinks of these 4 samples, what they like, what they don't like, what variations they're able to discern, hopefully, between some or all of them.
Yeah, for me, in checking color on them to begin with and then following up by nosing them, each of the 4 was bringing something different to the table. And at this stage, is it too early to reveal blended product, single cask? Is this still a stage where we're just looking for opinions on things? Well, what would you be comfortable with right now?
At this stage, I like to hear people's opinion, what they're getting on the nose and the palates, and overall thoughts. So yeah, Brian, I'll let you drive for a second and tell us what you're thinking of these 4 samples.
I'll just start with number 1. Light in color, soft. So my notes were nutty, apple skin. I got a little bit of light melon. Toasty, not oaky. Very light oak and very light spice on the finish.
Nice. John, anything to add to number 1?
For number 1, I was getting similar notes to what Brian was, but cut grass was one that jumped out to me. I got like baked apple, so kind of in that like a little bit sweet with a little bit of spice to it. Yeah.
Jason, any thoughts on number 1?
Yeah, on that fruit side of things, I was getting dehydrated apricots, which is something we've talked about in the past from VDC Spirit. And then I got a malt note, obviously barley, but then also quite a British note in tea biscuits.
Yes.
And so I don't know how familiar you are with the old tea biscuit, but separate from a digestive, it has that kind of brightness of grain to it. And I thought this was a very bright whiskey with that bright color. I had reflective gold, because who doesn't love a color on an audible podcast? What about you? As you obviously know what it is, but what about flavor profiles, and what are you hearing from the team here that fits or differentiates from what you've got?
I thought everybody's notes were spot on for this one. Yeah, the color is the lightest of the 4, so more of a straw gold for me. I got a little bit of a guava note and pineapple in there as well.
Joshua would love that. That's a Joshua note.
Yeah, I think the green apple skin is spot on. I do get like a caramelized hay note too. But yeah, it's something that is bright. There's a tinge of citrus coming through, and then on the palate, more of that cocoa cinnamon leading into the finish. But it's still, much more bright than. Well, we should do round 2 actually to compare and contrast.
So for number 2, I got a lot sweeter notes, so I went a little more onto the almost stone fruit, peach, almost cobblery. I also wrote lower ABV ? Because it felt a little less, I got a little more floral, sort of bordering that jasmine thing again. And then a little little bit of orange zest, orange peel on the finish.
John?
I got a little like it's like toasted baking spice and a little bit of that graham cracker on the nose. On the palate, definitely getting more of those sweet notes. I felt like at least up top was getting like strawberry was something that I felt like I was seeing a little bit of like the spice to it, and then I put lemon zest. Also had that like citrus peel on the finish.
Agreed on the floral side of this. I actually went in the geraniums direction on the nose, also with milk chocolate and dried cherries. And then for the palate, a drying quality, more of a dark chocolate, maybe even a ground pepper, leaning towards a cracked pepper. Definitely with the spice on this one.
Again, everybody's so spot on. I love it. I talked a lot about soft citrus in my notes. I mentioned lemon, but I also talked about mandarin orange.
Oh, yeah.
There is just so much fruit. The esters really dominate for me, but I like that lurking underneath because you do get the top notes of the floral, and then the whole body is just fruit. But then there's pecan and different variations of chocolate leading through. So, yeah, it's definitely telling a whole story there, which brings us to number 3.
Number 3, I found a little more spice on this one. Nutmeg, cinnamon, even cardamom on that border. Similar as far as the fruits goes. I got orange. I got a little more milk chocolate on this one. And again, I don't know if I was right about the ABV lower on the last one, but this one seemed slightly hotter than the previous.
So this one, for me, I was leaning in more of like a slight smoke direction, I felt like. Definitely like oaky was coming out on the nose. Was getting a little like nuttiness and leather, so a lot in that sort of direction. On the palate, I put peanut specifically. It was like a type of nuttiness different than what I usually associate with nutty, like a little on the lighter side of that. A little bit of that leather, and melon was another one that I was getting some of out of this.
Love the melon note. Okay.
Yeah, once again, it's down that fruit grain path. For me, on the nose, granola and honey. Then with a subtle cinnamon starting to come in. On the palate, I feel that cinnamon right down the center of my palate. The nuttiness is there for sure. Not to lead the witness, I got something specific to peanuts on the 4th, but definitely that nuttiness in there. Very, to me, recognizable as VDC. I think these are a lot of the notes we talk about the most. And certainly from earlier today in the barrel house, talking Honey Nut Cheerios. And definitely a component of that in here as well.
I love it. Yeah, for me, the first word I wrote was spice. And then oaky, the clove, white pepper to accentuate the other ones that I wrote that you said, Brian. I also got toasted marshmallow and golden grams. It's very aromatic for me, but there's also that level of sweetness lurking right there at the base. All right, we're up to the last sample. Brian?
That number 3 I keep sipping away on. So,
it's hard to put down.
Did you just sip 3 or 4?
I had to sip 4 again because this one perplexes me a little bit. This one I got a slight savory note. I wrote mesquite ? Because there is a definitely more of a smoky influence. I got less fruit right up front here. I did get a strong brown sugar and, again, nutty. I'm not sure where I'd go on the nut scale here. I'm thinking maybe pecan. I got to say I'm still perplexed by this one a little bit. I think this is her wild card.
What was Dustin's word from earlier? Befuddled?
Yes.
Yeah, for number 4, the first thing that I wrote down was leather-bound book. I was getting a little leather in that, the pages of an old book. A little cocoa powder, also that nuttiness. I went walnut. That's the first thing that jumped out to me. Again, kind of a melon note. I wrote specifically honeydew for this one, and then definitely that brown sugar.
Yeah, to go along with what's been said previously, it was the outlier of the four. It definitely took a turn. Not as recognizable for me as VDC, but maybe you'll reveal in a second. For you, John, I absolutely wrote cocoa powder on my notes here. Subtle pepper, and then to continue the nuttiness from you chaps, I had peanut skin. Which is a note I talk about a lot, where you take the unshelled peanut, and as you open that, you've got the dustiness of the shell, but then you've got the skin around the peanut in there. And so it's such a specific note, but speaks to a kind of a dustiness, a dry quality. I like what you were saying, John, about the honeydew melon. No part of the nose or palate took me to a fruit place. And so I love hearing people who know their spirit find it where others maybe don't. So I'm excited for the reveal.
Yeah, the first words I wrote were drier nose to me. This whole thing is drier.
Yep.
I did get citrus peel. That was my fruit place. I didn't go into any melon territory for this one, but I love that because I think if you dig down deeper, it's there. A lot of bitter chocolate, licorice. The brown sugar nutty notes was just spot on. I think there was a savory note hanging out on the sidelines that I really enjoyed, but different. So real quick, do you want to go in a circle and rank these, your favorite to least favorite? Maybe Brian kicking us off?
This is tough because, well, it's. Well, no, I don't want to start. I want you to start, but it's difficult because they're so different, and it's ranking them to what end? Ranking for what you would want to drink, ranking for what you would want to bottle, ranking for what you think gets closest to VDC characteristics. You can tell I was in education for a while, and
Yes.
rubrics are my specialty.
So they're ranking based on personal preference here. They get to take their science hat off and do what is most enjoyable that they want to keep consuming and that they think is the most well-rounded or, complete on its own of the four. So that's the ranking in this way.
Okay, so I went number 3 as my first choice, I think, because it felt closest to home. I went number 4 for 2. Or, second favorite, number 4, just because of the sort of the unique characteristics. And then I'm sort of back and forth between 3 and 4, but I did number 1 for my third pick and number 2 for my fourth pick.
Wow.
I actually had the exact same order that you did. Number 3 was my favorite. Thought it had a lot going on. Number 2, I was struggling to figure out, but I found myself still going back to it, and it does have a lot of the flavors that I just find the most interesting. And then for number 1 and number 2, they're both pretty close, but I put number 1 is my third favorite and number 2 is fourth, but all pretty close.
So I've made a terrible mistake. So sample number 3 was my favorite. Mm-hmm. To continue with John and Brian.
And Amanda.
Spoiler alert. It just fit, right? You said this, it's Brian. It's closest to home, right? That was there. I then made sample number 4 my fourth rank. Not because I don't like it, but I thought if sample number 3 was the closest to home, sample number 4 was the farthest from home. And so I made that rank number 4 for me. Samples 1 and 2 were interchangeable. I could go back and forth on which was my second and my third. But I'm now filled with regret because fourth wasn't my fourth favorite. It was the most distant from the distillery where we're sitting.
But you're okay. This is a place where you get to do things like that. And as long as you explain yourself and your thinking, you win.
You're also looking at me with love in your eyes, so thank you.
Yes.
I still feel safe.
For me, number 3 was my favorite, but I gave sample number 2 my second place. So I did differ from you only there.
That's the one I have as my second.
Okay, see, there we go. And I think it was because I really enjoyed the full journey it took us on and the fruit getting to dominate. Are you ready for the reveal?
Absolutely. But pause for a second. So where did you put sample number 4?
Sample number 4 was tied with sample number 1 for me. That
For
was
the
my
third
tie.
spot.
Third spot.
Okay.
Yeah, but I kind of didn't feel like I counted on that because I know what it is.
It's Lagavulin.
I don't matter as much.
It's not Lagavulin.
So a little bit of background on these barrels. This is kind of like a story that Brian and I worked on. We went to Kentucky on a trip together just to kind of visit our warehouse partners and not warehouse, our barrel partners for the ex-bourbon barrels.
Understood.
And we just kept talking. We drank a lot of whiskey and we talked about what we liked and things we hadn't done yet. And we talked about sense of place. West Virginia Great Barrel Company is the first time we've really partnered up with a new barrel company. And John Price went out there with me not
John
that
is
long
the John
ago.
of this segment.
Yes, John is
Price.
our newest member of the sensory panel. And yeah, I took a crew out there early this year. And they're phenomenal. They started this company because a big flood came through this area of West Virginia, and they hired a bunch of local people to build houses. And when they were done building houses, they pivoted to building barrels for local breweries, and their quality is amazing. And I kept thinking, especially riffing with Brian, how cool it would be to use Virginia oak barrels and to do something there. But I didn't want to do aging in new oak. I wanted to do cask finishing. That way we didn't lose our DNA.
I heard.
So put in an order, and I was all about toasting. That's my background. We've got our STR casks, toasting. That's what Jim Swan was talking about back in the day. All my time in France, it seems like all we're talking about are toast levels at all these different tonnelleries. So West Virginia Great Barrel Company already has really good capacity for toast. So I put in specs for different toast levels to experiment. And we put our already aged whiskey for 6 years in ex-bourbon. We moved it into these different toast levels. So I'm going to ignore sample number 1 and tell you that sample number 2 is a whiskey of ours that is finished in a medium level toast barrel.
Okay.
Virginia oak.
Okay.
Yes.
And finished for how long at this stage?
Just half a year.
Half a year.
Half a year.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And this, just like we discussed in the Cask House, first fill bourbon going into the
Yes.
toasted oak.
Yes. So like
for
7 months. Yeah. Yeah. So just over half a year. Yep.
We're not going to follow her over 1 month.
Oh no, an extra month. Yeah.
Okay.
Jumping from sample number 2 to sample number 3, all of our favorites. This is a medium heavy toast. That is the only difference. Same whiskey went in.
Are you
Same
able,
time.
Are you able to talk a little on process, on the difference between a medium and a heavy toast? Because we clearly talk about it in Scotch.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we always know what we're saying. If you could
Sure.
elucidate.
Yeah. Toasting, unlike charring, you're not actually catching these barrels on fire. And toasting is really where the flavor is. If you char, there is that red layer that's deeper. And when you're past the point of charring is it's, a way of cleaning the barrels. And it's providing a carbon layer, which is filtering your whiskey. Mm-hmm. But toast is changing the molecular structure of the stave. So it's that Maillard reaction, and it's crystallizing wood sugars. You're increasing different lactones and vanillins. You're giving access to things. So dialing up the level or the duration of the toast, it's not that long. I mean, a char is super quick. We're talking seconds. We can toast slow and low and do a lot longer to get deeper into the wood stave. So it's a lot more impactful. And yeah, toasting is where the flavor is at, and it protects the integrity of the wood a lot better than certain charring processes can.
Okay, so just to be clear for the listener, there's no charring involved.
0 char on these. Yep. Well, our new make whiskey aged in ex-bourbon barrels that had been level 4 alligator charred, but that,
Yes.
that was only
Yes,
that. These
understood.
new toasted oak barrels were not charred one bit.
Wowzers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then you can guess what our crazy number 4 is. We went from medium to medium heavy. Number 4 is just a heavy toast.
Okay.
That is the difference. Yeah.
And we're still talking the same kind of 6-7 months?
Yes. Exact same time.
Look at that.
Brian and I were looking through and pulling samples. Gosh, we first did after 4 months. Yeah. And even 3 more months after our first sample pulls, it's changed so much. It's shocking. So the big reveal is number one.
Yes.
Number one
Buried the
is
lead.
a second fill heavy toast barrel. I was curious how much more we could get out of it. We
Brian
talked
just
about
gave the
it.
exact same. And you're the man that pulled the samples. Second. Okay. Gosh, we've only talked first fill all day today, and you
All
had a
day.
second fill up your sleeve the whole
I did.
time.
We never have released anything in second fill. So I like to think you never know. We want to hang on to these and give them a second life for different projects. And I really thought it was lovely. The fruit notes, I'm sticking by my guava.
Yeah, the guava was a good note on that first sample. So clearly we're sitting here today, Barrel Bootcamp, something more scientific analysis going on here. What are you taking from this conversation, and what do you foresee either for the 4 samples in front of us or because of the 4 samples in front of us?
This is starting to give me data, and I'll be using this for not only working on blends and percentages of different toast levels, but this is also feeding directly into my 2025 and 2026 cask order plan for my breakdown of what I want as far as the ratios of what levels of toast. And I don't ever plan on just I'm only going to do medium heavy toast, even though we all like that one the best. It does mean that I'm feeling really good about making that continually the majority, but still doing some of the different toast levels to play into, because having that heavy toast to play with is fun.
That is wild, really wild. Comment, Brian?
Yeah, I would say with the heavy toast, as Amanda said, very unique on its own, but that played into, 5 of the medium, 4 of the medium plus, and a couple of those really makes for a nice balance. And we just released our Blue Ridge, which is our toasted oak. And we had to push it a little bit. Sales was ready for it. We had to, bring them down and get them ready, which is why sample number 1 here, we did refills because it had only been 4 or 5 months in barrel. So very nice to see that the second fill is coming along very well after just, what now, Amanda, 2 months?
2 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see.
Yeah, real good stuff.
Just in closing out here and listening to you, Brian, during our analysis here, you were getting a feeling of changing strengths, changing ABVs. Given the reveal, is there a sense of why you were getting that feeling from these samples? That's open to either of you.
Yeah, I mean, he was right there as a tiny bit of variation in the ABVs, so well done. And that's fascinatingly, the casks are not located that far apart from each other in the warehouse.
Yeah.
But we've noticed there are definitely humidity pockets, and so we're having natural reduction in cask over time. And the one with the highest ABV, which is weird to start out with, but only tiny bit, was sample number 1.
Okay.
But yeah, you were really right with your feelings about, okay, this seems softer. This has a little bit more of a kick to it.
Were we in the high 50s on these, mid 50s on these?
You're hovering at 60.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
Oh.
for the one. And then the ones below, I think they're all like 59.2 to 59.4.
Okay.
So pretty close.
Yeah, they're still up there, though.
They're
we're,
up there.
We're not dipping too
Yeah,
far.
Not too far, yeah.
This has been an absolute revelation, and I'm so sincerely thankful for you bringing me in. We've got more analysis to be doing. We're not going to capture it on wax. And so thank you so much for today. And we've still got work to be done. So cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If we're known in these parts for getting geeky, Amanda is more than happy to get down and dirty in the geeky details with all of us. She is top notch. She is knowledgeable. Gosh. I was honestly, you maybe even hear it in my voice right now, I was a little flummoxed that she was willing to record that toasted project with us and just to say, hey, honestly, What did you get? What did you see? What did you think? Where did it go? How did it work? Just phenomenal. And for me, again, I think this speaks a little bit back to Adam's earlier email in today's episode. But yes, I'm an independent bottler. You're an independent bottler, Joshua. Mm-hmm. When I walk into VDC, I'm an independent bottler and I'm a whiskey geek. And I'm the co-host of One Nation Under Whisky with recording equipment. And I'm a friend of Amanda and Brian and Dustin and John. And it's like, that's a lot of hats, a hat on a hat on a hat, if you will. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, you just sit and you have an honest whiskey conversation. And the rest takes care of itself. And I love the simplicity of a moment like that, where you just talk about the whiskey. And it makes me think about our very early days in founding Single Cask Nation. And, the nation was used advisedly, which was a community of whiskey drinkers who could come together and always have whiskey in common.
Exactly.
We go to Ardnamurchan. We have whiskey in common. In a future episode, we'll talk to the guys at Blum Brothers. Mm-hmm. What do we have in common? Whiskey. Right?
Yep.
It's always whiskey. And to see the level of honesty presented by Amanda, absolutely top notch. So sincere thanks to the entire team at VDC for opening their doors to me, to One Nation Under Whisky, to the listenership. It's not taken lightly, and it's very much appreciated.
Speaking of listenership, I want us to get back to the emails, because we reserved 2 for the very end. And this is just a reminder for the listeners. Jason, you had challenged our listeners to send us in the distilleries they would like to see us bottle from. And we heard so far from Aaron Gong talking about Scotch whiskey distilleries, and then Adam Polanski talking about American single malt distilleries. And who do we want to go with next?
Why don't you do the Skinny, since it's great to hear from Skinny.
It's always good to hear.
I'm also noticing we've got 2 short ones and then a longer one. So why don't you take a couple of shorter ones, and then I'll take us out with a longer one.
Okay. So Skinny says here, and the subject is just distillery wants. He says, "Howdy, y'all." Should I do this whole thing with like a southern accent? Howdy, y'all.
Hard pass.
No? Okay.
Hard pass.
I'll sound like Jesse from Toy Story. Long time no email. Or C. You asked, I just answer.
That's true.
I'd love to see more Kleinlich and Lechig. Then, a controversial one I happen to be a fan of. That's my drum roll.
Insert here.
Bladnoch. Look at that. As a lowlander, Jason, this probably hits your heartstrings. Or not. I don't know.
Isn't it pretty to think so?
He goes on, he says, I know Bladnoch is very hit or miss, even in my experience, but boy, when it's a good one, it's a good one. Anywho, miss y'all. Can't wait to share another dram in meat space one of these days. I don't know what's meat space.
I'm guessing where we have physical bodies.
That sounds horrific. Fucking meat space.
Keep yourself peeled in meat space.
Oh, gosh. It's going to be like Jason Tartar here. It's going to be terrible.
Yeah, Bladnoch's an interesting one to bring up there. He is clearly spot on. Mm-hmm. When it's good, it's very good.
Right.
And when it misses, it's happening more often than not. But yeah, I'd be happy to find a Bladnoch. Mm-hmm. I've got nothing against finding a Bladnoch. I remember some of the 8-year-old releases that came out under Raymond Armstrong.
Oh, yeah.
Very bright, very fruity, very tasty little treats. Obviously, we've never done a Bladnoch to date, so it would be a first distillery for us. So, yeah. This is why I set this challenge. We're more than happy to keep our eyes open for Bladnoch coming in.
Yeah, for sure. And I love the mention of Lechig, right? We had Aaron asking for Tobermory twice, and that's, of course, unpeated. And so now, here we are back at the Tobermory Distillery, but looking for peated. And that's one I know, especially you, Jason, you always have your eyes peeled for a good Lechig.
Yeah, that's an easy one. Yep, always looking.
Yeah, and Kleinleash, yes, of course. The more Kleinleash, the better. We will continue to look for some. Hopefully, we'll be releasing some at some point. Fingers crossed. And then,
Dan Greisen, of all people, sends us a short and sweet here.
Okay. Do you want to take that one?
No, you go for that. I'll get us out
that's
here.
right. You wanted to do the long-winded one because you like to talk. So here we are.
Save you some editing time.
So he says, I'm going to throw this distillery out there. It's one no one talks about, but damn if I haven't had some amazing drams from them. Give me a Glen Ord and I'd be a happy man. Cheers, good people. Dan.
Nobody saw Glen Ord coming. Glen Ord didn't see Glen Ord coming.
I did.
No.
I remember, Jason. No. Was I alone or did you and I go together? I think I was alone. This was maybe 2017. And I went up to Canada to meet Graham Usher. And it was at Graham Usher's house. He had a bottle of Glen Ord 30-year-old.
Oh, interesting.
Right? 30 years old, first fill bourbon, big, spicy bourbon cask, loveliness. And that was my first and only experience with Glen Ord. And I said, hot damn, if that's not a great whiskey. And then fast forward just a year or two later, and we were on Isla, and we went to the Kalila distillery, and I got a sample of the Kalila unpeated 17-year-old. And that Kalila unpeated 17-year-old reminded me of the beauty of Glen Ord. It tasted like this rich, robust Highlander. And so it's had me wanting to look at Glen Ord as an independent bottler because I know we'll never get our hands on an unpeated Kalila. At least I don't think we'll ever get our hands on that. So,
I had a Glen Ord 30-year-old, gosh, probably 20 years ago now. No, maybe less than that. Maybe 15 years ago now. And it was an official 30-year-old put out by the distillery, and it was hugely uninteresting.
Oh wow!
And it was, listen, it was very grain dependent. But it felt more like soft grain rather than meaningful, sculpted, malted barley.
Was it cask strength? Do you remember?
I'm going to say it probably wasn't. But even at 30, it would have dipped into the 40s. That kind of left a little sour taste. Not literally a sour taste, but it kind of left me a little... like, oh, Glen Ord, like, ugh. But again, right, what have we talked about in today's episode? There was that Ben Romack. Here's Skinny mentioning Bladnoch. Right. Here's Dan with Glen Ord, right? Those moments sometimes in whiskey life where you have one or two examples and you move on and you don't think of it again. It doesn't resonate for you. There's always good casks out there. There's always something interesting waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, I think back to the Fettercairn that we bottled for the Massachusetts market. I remember tasting Fettercairn a few years back, one or two examples.
Agreed.
And I said, maybe this isn't for me. This isn't for us. And then we tasted that one that we bottled, and it was remarkable whiskey. So yes, there's always good casks to be found, always. And
Benny's just brought in an exclusive Auchentoshan. Right? Everyone's experience with Auchentoshan kind of sounds the same, but there are casks that make you go, hot damn, like, where did that come from?
Yep.
And you and I in that selection were looking at each other like, okay, is this labeled correctly? This is Auchentoshan. Phenomenal. Really, really wonderful.
It's not like those distilleries are making bad whiskeys. It's that you and I share a very similar palate. and things that don't hit for me don't hit for you, but they hit for other people, right? So I just want to be clear there. We're not trying to shit on these distilleries. We're just saying it's been hard to find ones that sit with us.
Let's close out with this longer email that comes in from Tom Judelka, who we just saw the other week in our Zoom call, and really excellent long-time Nation member, much appreciated.
Indeed.
And so this is pretty lengthy, so let's save commentary for afterwards.
All right.
But let's get a good, clear reading here.
Lips are sealed.
Greetings, Triple J. I hope this finds you well. This email is in response to the request from the most recent One Nation Under Whisky episode for distilleries we would like to see from Single Cask Nation. Here are some suggestions in no particular order. Oishi. I was first exposed to them through your last bottling, and I have been trying to find them wherever I can. I'm a big fan of the Isla Cask finish, but unfortunately can't find it in my area. Any other Japanese whiskey brands that you all feel are worth sharing? I trust your palates and look forward to anything bearing the SCN label. Bunnahabhain in ex-bourbon casks. Does such a thing exist? I'm not sure, but I would love to see what their distillate tastes like without a sherry finish. Compass Box Marrying Cask. Perhaps you could leverage your relationship with James Saxon to snag one of those for SCN. I have seen some of these both online, sealbacks, and also at my local chain, Binnies. I trust a Single Cask Nation pick would be stellar. Mortlach, Clynlish, or Glentalkers, Isle of Rassy. They use so many unique casks to create their flagship that I imagine any of those single casks would be very interesting. Josh and I are side-eyeing one another here without saying anything out loud. Other international brands such as Amrut, Kiro, Penderyn, Stoning. Would you consider an Irish whiskey at any point in the future? I would also be open to having a Single Cask Nation tequila, mezcal, sotol, or even a gin. Here's what I'm hearing. I know we're editorializing at the end, but what I'm hearing here is a Single Cask Nation superfan who says, if you put it in a bottle, I trust you, I'll buy it.
Hey, right, he says, I trust your palates, and I look forward to anything bearing the Single Cask Nation label. I mean, how incredibly cool and special is that?
Really, really wonderful. Yeah. He goes on, I enjoy all different types of spirits and would gladly try something that your quote-unquote educated palates deem worthy of my attention. Final paragraph. Hopefully, this was what you were looking for. Yes, it was, Tom. Thank you. You passed. A+. I am really looking forward to the latest round of bottlings. Both the Glenmurray and the Glen Scotia sound excellent. Spoiler alert, they are excellent. They are. On the other hand, my bank account is not really looking forward to these next few months. We'll have to find a way to compromise or not. Smiling emoji, Tom Judelka. That email is a dream come true.
Yes.
That is everything we've tried to build in 13 years of Single Cask Nation. And the trust, the belief, the willing to listen to what we're doing with quote-unquote educated palates is everything we could dream of. That's the nation that we had hoped to build. So without belaboring any particular points, Joshua, any points of return in that email that you want to make comment upon?
You know, I love his comment about the Bunnahabhain and ex-bourbon casks, and my guess is he's not talking about the peated stuff. I think he's talking about unpeated Bunnahabhain in bourbon. And I'm with him. Like I prefer unpeated Bunnahabhain, but it's always in sherry or some sort of wine. And I don't think I've ever had a bourbon cask unpeated Bunnahabhain. I think our 28-year-old was a refill sherry, if I'm not mistaken, refill sherry Hoggy that didn't really bear much resemblance to sherry. I have a label here. Let me double check.
That's exactly what I was looking for. I've got the bottle right here. Refill Oloroso Sherry Hogshead.
Yeah, right. So,
and unfortunately, the color makes you remember that it was bourbon of some description. Oh man, I haven't tasted this in the longest time.
That's remarkable whiskey, that 28-year-old.
Oh gosh, immediately fruity just in opening the bottle.
Yep.
That was in the air around me here. Oh, delightfully fruity. What did we put on the label? An indulgent whiskey offering a cornucopia of candy shop goodies and a host of patisserie delights. The oak on the nose and palate hints at age, yet the liveliness cannot be ignored. That's a Joshua Hatton line right there.
That is.
Cannot be ignored.
Cannot be ignored. Oh, look at you taking a pull from the bottle. My man. Right?
I know we're known as texture guys, but when this was bottled in June of 2016, the texture on this is remarkable.
Oh, I wish I had my bottle around me. That way I can pull directly from the bottle.
Oh, that's nice. It's like being in a damp forest up in the hills.
Ooh, keep talking.
I'm looking at distilled February of 1988.
Oh my
that
gosh.
just drew my attention.
So, so unpeated Bunnahabhain in an ex-bourbon, I think just sounds really interesting to me. You had me at Rosé. You know, what Rosé are doing are remarkable. And I'm very happy to say we love the Dobby family, and we love Alistair up there as well.
Oh, yeah, we just saw them in London.
We did just see them in London. So, again, it sounds painful, but keep your eyes peeled for potentials there.
Well, I would make 2 points here. Number one, Jess internally champions Kiro.
Yeah.
Jess is passionate about that distillery and brings it up to us all the time. Like, we need to get Kiro into a single cask nation bottle. So we're listening closely there. His question, would you consider an Irish whiskey at any point in the future? Again, this is from the Jess corner of the office. Like, Jess asks us about Irish all the time. Like, what are we doing going forward on Irish? And I think this has been true ever since we bottled that Cooley way back in the day, is we haven't been avoiding Irish. Irish became very rare and very expensive.
Yeah.
And it's not that we weren't tasting good samples. We were just not sampling Irish because it was too hard to get, and when you could get it, it was too expensive, and we couldn't put it in the bottle for the price we wanted to put it at. So if that ecosystem changes around Irish casks, we would bottle an Irish in a heartbeat. Wouldn't think twice about it.
Yep. 100%. Yep.
Yeah. And then just to close out on the tequila mezcal sotol line, very near and dear to all of our hearts, and we'd love to get our hands on more. We just want to bottle it right, and we want to represent the producers who are putting their time and effort into making excellent distillate. So when we can do that right, you'll see that back in an SCN bottle.
There you go. Perfect. What a lovely...
I haven't said too many things out of school, have I? Those seem like general comments that I would make quite happily.
Yeah. I mean, there's other points here that we haven't touched on, but sometimes it's nice to stay quiet on certain things and move on.
Leave a little mystery.
Yeah, a little mystery, right? Jason, thank you again so much for taking time out of your day to go down to visit with the people at VDC.
Thank you to them for allowing me to take time out of their day.
Right. Which is it's special. It gets back to what Adam Polanski was saying, right? Our relationships with these American single malt producers is something that we cherish, and we will be casting our eyes to more American single malt, and our relationship with VDC is near and dear.
Googling 888 in Massachusetts as soon as we get out of this recording.
There you go. And thanks to the listeners who sent in their emails. I mentioned at the opening of this podcast that there was 4 emails we were going to be reading, but there's actually 5, and we did get more than that. But there's also so many hours and minutes and seconds in the day, so maybe we'll bring some up at another time. But we wanted to
thanks to
touch on this.
everybody who emailed in.
And with that, Jason, I would like to bid you and the listener adieu, and say cheers.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to those who are listening to this on the day it drops, the day before Thanksgiving 2024. If you listen to it in the future, I hope you're doing well. And if you're listening to this the day before Thanksgiving and it's not a thing you celebrate, have a good day. We value you, we cherish you, we appreciate you, and we give thanks for all of you. Cheers.
Cheers. Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with... Yeah, I know, right?
It wasn't quite fully cleared.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
We should do a laryngitis episode one time.
Jesus.
It's just like this.
Sounds like Diane Rehm.
Oh, whatever happened to Diane Rehm? I'm Diane Rehm. She sounded great when she had a cold, and she would talk about that. Have you ever heard any of those episodes? When she had a cold, her vocal cords would get inflamed.
Hi, this is Diane Rehm feeling terrible.
She sounded just like Johnny Carson. It was great.
You ever see them together?
All right. Just like Michael and LaToya.
See?
Right? Topical. Okay.
Speaking of topical, I just finished a book on Siskel and Ebert.
All right.
Not written by Siskel and Ebert, about Siskel and Ebert.
Well, because Siskel died a while ago, and then Ebert just...
They both died a while ago.
Yeah, but Ebert lasted a little longer, but he had to have that surgery. Remember, he had cancer.
Remember, I just finished the book.
Oh, what's that?
You're like, remember? I'm like, I just finished the book.
It's in the book.
It's in the book.
All right, let's try this with water now. Okay.